listening to the Bored to Death Horrorcast, rendering scary movies and TV shows into wet, chewable chunks.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, and other assorted gender assignations. Welcome to the Bored to Death Horrorcast for 2021.
Oh,
yes,
about time.
The Binge Czar is here for Horrorcast this year.
I know it ain't too spoopy for you this time.
No, I figured I might as well just deal with it. So, I am Jay, being joined by
Sam
and
Chris.
And this year for Horrorcast, we are kicking it off with VHS 94.
It was. I found this out by mistake. I was screwing around looking at Voodoo, and it just came across as I was looking up different movies on Rotten Tomato after I saw it on Voodoo, and then all of a sudden VHS was up there with 100% tomato score because it was viewed at a film festival previously, and had 10 full critic reviews at 100%.
Well, damn.
And I'm like, holy crap! What are they saying about it? VHS is going back to its roots. If you liked 1 and 2, you'll love 94. Because there was a third one, and then there was an offshoot Double X, which was all female directors, female leads.
I think I remember hearing about that one. I should preface this by saying I have not seen any of the previous VHS things. I know only that it's horror anthology.
Yes.
I haven't either.
So that sort of surprised both me and Sam because we figured this would have been the sort of thing
I was surprised. I knew you wouldn't have seen it, but yes.
I mean, I don't really watch a whole lot of anthology
I didn't before
movies.
The first one.
Like, I have seen the original Creep Show. I did watch that, and that's pretty much it. I don't remember if I've seen any other ones, and it sounds like somebody just dropped something in the kitchen.
Yeah, that's just the house ghost starting to make some noise because it's that time of year.
It's like, oh, don't wait for me, I'm coming down.
Yeah, basically.
You fell going down the stairs.
Yeah, I wasn't a part of any of the Horrorcast stuff last year because while I find horror stuff fascinating, at the same time I try not to expose myself.
A gem.
I try not to expose too much of myself to it because it's the sort of thing that's going to lurk in the back of my head and it's going to keep me up at night. But I figured, what the hell? I should just go ahead and do it.
YOLO.
Basically. And hey, who knows? Maybe it'll give me some inspiration for
Sorry, I should say
writing
the
stuff.
more adult way, Carpe Diem.
Yeah, there you go. The original way.
The only way.
Yes, correct.
So with VHS, the first one, the anthology, hooked me in because I saw a little bit of clips of the trailer, and it looked really good and interesting because you got these different stories. The bookends are amazing in the first one. I liked all but probably one of the short stories. I mean, I didn't dislike it. In the second movie, I actually had one I really, really didn't like. For reasons, I just didn't like it. And the others were good, and the bookends were good. The third one was VHS Viral, which took a different scope on it, and the bookend product was a little more involved in it, which was very strange. Double X, I can't remember a whole lot of. I just remember I didn't really like most of the stories. But if VHS 94 goes back to the roots of 1 and 2, and it is as good as some of the reviews say it is, and it's going to 94, isn't that more of our time to shine as whatever the hell gens we are that they want to classify us as?
I still consider myself tail end of Gen X, very like tail end, because 1981 is sort of in that weird. It's not. Nobody's really quite sure where they want to classify it.
You wouldn't like what it says online that we are.
Oh yeah,
I definitely. You are in it.
No. I flat out disagree with that because I do not have that mentality.
It doesn't mean. It just means the age, the time is there. The mentality doesn't have to be.
My
cousin grew up in a different era. He has a different mentality.
That's where I disagree. You have to have both the era and the mentality to be lumped in with that generation.
But people just see a number and call it just generation. So
yeah, and I just disagree.
Just
with that.
because they say boomers doesn't mean that somebody in that generation is going to act as what they would be considered a boomer.
It's just this is why we shouldn't don't label people. Yes. Maybe just don't label people?
I'm a horror connoisseur.
Oh, I just remembered. I did watch most of ABCs of Death.
ABCs of Death is very excellent. I think it's done in the same mentality and possibly the same group. I didn't read too much into it, but
I mean, I didn't finish it.
it's a long fucker too.
It
because
really
it's A through
is.
Z.
Yeah, it really is.
They did some really funny ones and some good ones in there.
Well, the funny one that I remember from that was
F?
the Japanese execution one, where the guy who was being executed kept making funny faces, and he kept
that one.
and he kept distracting the executioner. And a lot of the funny faces were just ones where you're just like, wait, what?
They do some like weird CG or like face putty on it because it was ridiculous.
Yeah, like there was one where the guy's eyes were floating in the air.
Do you remember what F was?
No. Like I said, it
Oh,
had
I'm not
been a
going to say
while
anything
since.
because we might come back around on one of these. We might do an anthology month or something because I kind of want to revisit some of these with you guys. If you don't remember it and he's never seen it, I think he would. There were some really disturbing bits in those.
There were.
And then there were some really funny ones to break up the disturbingness. Like, some of them actually shook me, and it was like, it takes a lot to mess with me.
Yeah.
I don't like body horror. I don't like I saw the first Hostel, and the thing that really fucked with me the most was the blowtorch to the eye on the poor Japanese girl.
Oh yeah, and the guy had to cut it off.
Oh, it fucking just I almost turned off the movie then. I just was so close to the end at that point. I was like,
That's
my dad came home at the end where she just saw herself and jumped in front of the train, and he's like, "What the fuck are you watching?" I go, "Something I'm never watching again." And he's like, "I sure as shit hope not."
So yeah,
I think he came in a little bit before that too, but he's like, "This is fucked up."
but it's a relatively short one. This is a Shudder original. We are watching this on Shudder. It's only 102 minutes, so
there's no purpose for me to do shout-outs, but I used code Jake Monroe for Monroe Music and his live streams and his other reviews.
Yep.
That he does.
We don't often give a whole lot of shout-outs on the Bingecast.
His music is great. If you get the chance, check him out if you like metal.
Okay. But I don't really have anything else to add. I have no preconceived notions about going into this because I haven't seen any of the previous ones. All I know is it's probably going to sit in the back of my head, but who knows? Maybe I can somehow take some of what I see and turn it into inspiration for the stuff I want to write.
In that case, we really need to get you to watch John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy because those.
Well, we are planning on doing that
because those will definitely be sitting in the back of your head.
Are we going for John Carpenter's November?
Yeah, I think we will. I think after Horrorcast is done, or at least Horrorcast is just going to turn into a 2-month thing.
Yeah,
we're gonna just in November it's going to become John Carpenter month.
All right, if somebody else shoes out for that one, because my stuff expires in a month, and anyway. I don't like to watch horror movies outside of Spooky Month. Oh, screw it! I love watching horror movies, but I have too many streaming services. That's
fair.
Well, that plus John's done more than just horror. Like, come on, he did. What was it? They Live with Roddy Piper.
You said it's not like a quote unquote horror movie.
It's not a comedy.
What?
It's a comedy.
Okay.
Action comedy.
All right. Anyway,
it's considered horror.
VHS 94. So that's going to be all for this intro. So we'll be back after the binge.
As we consume our fare, give us a like and subscribe. If you wish to commune with us, then seek us out on social media on Facebook and Twitter at BTD_Bingecast. The Bored to Death Clan is part of the CKCC Radio Hive, which includes J Bunny's Music Hub, the Race Nerd Podcast, Real Paranormal Talk, Ranking Tracks, Motivational Moves, Park Hopper 101, and the Nerd Table. To appease the Elder Gods, contribute to the CKCC Radio Patreon. Now the binge has finished, so let us purge.
And we're back. So, I like anthology things where there is either a framing sort of thing, or if it's all like in a shared universe kind of thing. This I feel like was more just a framework than anything. The only one that we know for certain was in sort of the same universe as the framing narrative was the last one, Terror.
Though I did see.
You did see the coffin from the empty wake. Yeah.
And then there was something to do with Ratma that we saw after that one.
Yeah. But the framing story in VHS 94 is a SWAT team is going in to raid a warehouse where there's some sort of cult activity going on.
They thought it was they were doing a drug den.
That's right, because there was some sort of stuff that was being distributed potentially from there, and we did see some sort of weird goop that was being...
That was the reference to the Ratma.
Yeah. And when they burst in there, they find, there's like a weird-ass cult. There's like TVs sort of all over the place. And of course, this is like 1994, so the quality is, it's all
everything. VHS,
it's all VHS. It's all got the TV film grain effects sort of thing going on with the tracking lines.
I was saying that I feel like this is what Paranormal Activity 2 should have been, because that was supposed to have taken place in the 90s, and the video footage from that was way too clean.
Yeah. And then while they're and they have a cameraman there, I guess, just to record it for liability purposes, maybe to protect.
Well, I think it was more because it was more widespread on the news, so they could have documentation.
That's right. And while they're in this first room where there are like dead bodies everywhere, and they all have their eyes like ripped out.
And they're on the floor.
And they're on the floor. They're like cradled into people's hands and everything. And then the camera sort of focuses briefly on one of the TVs as a video starts like flickering on there. And then we're into the video, which is basic. And that one, which is titled Storm Drain, deals with this TV news reporter going around getting interviews from people about a cryptid of sorts that people have been spotting in the vicinity of the town that they call the Rat Man. And this reporter is talking with this creepy guy who's being interviewed with an AR-15 in his hands. Which I'm just like...
Do you think he was connected to the last one?
Possibly. There's no real easy way to tell, but it's possible. But after they're done with the interview, she and her cameraman go back to the van and to sort of their news van to report in about everything. And somebody there wants them to get a shot of her in the storm drain that this guy pointed to as being saying is like that. I've seen it in there. And so she somewhat reluctantly has to go back because they don't want her to come back to the studios without some role of her.
Something that's going to break the news.
Yeah. And while she's literally just doing a piece to camera with the storm drain, in the mouth of the storm drain, the cameraman spots something in the background. And
first he said he wanted you in the storm drain. She was like right at the edge.
Yeah, and so they go a little bit further in, and that's when he spots something further in the storm drain, and it's like a homeless man's bed with like a sleeping bag. It looks like there might have been something in there, but when he pulls it open, it's just like a bunch of junk. And
stuffed bunny, and she goes on about, I was like, do you think there's children living down here in this thing?
And so then she decides, why don't we make this into a story about the humanitarian piece, the state of homelessness in America kind of thing? Because she makes some comments like, this is disgusting. We're the richest nation on the planet, and we treat people like this. So they go a little bit further in, and she's like comes to a corner and stops. And when he catches up to her, you can just see a figure like in the darkness sort of staring at them, then turns and just walks into the shadows. And while we're watching this, I'm just like, that'd be the part where I just be like, nope, and just turn and leave.
It's like, we got everything right? Yep, let's go.
Yeah. But they're a bit weirded out, and then they spot like a little like homeless like nest kind of thing in the
It was a tent and some stuff in it.
Mm-hmm. And when they go in to sort of look around, he's looking at some sort of like shape just sort of lying there on the floor, and then an eye opens. He reels back in shock, drops his camera, and she's like trying to like calm him down, see just like something go past the camera, and rather than leave, or is that the point where they leave, or do they try to go a little bit? No, that's right.
Because they talk to the guy.
Yeah, that's right. They talk to Bill. That's right.
Bill, the black goo-covered homeless man.
Well, he was just sort of covered in black stuff. It wasn't quite goo. It had like dried. It was like dried.
Looked like he'd been playing around in a swamp.
Mm-hmm. And they're just sort of talking to him, and she's like, "Are you living alone down here?" Or, and he's just, and he then just sort of looks up at, he just says, "Ratma," and she's like, "Did you say Ratman?" And he just sort of looks up at her and starts smiling as this black goo starts dripping out of his mouth, and that's the point where they're just like, "Okay, let's go."
We got what we need.
And
hard.
Yeah, Jeff, the cameraman, starts running. And then he hears her scream, turns around, he's just like, he calls after her, and he's just like, he turns to leave, and then we get a jump scare as there's somebody waiting for him right there, and just cut to later, they're in this sort of space in the storm drain there, and somebody else is holding the camera. As she wakes up, her hands are sort of tied together with a bunch of like plastic bags, which was a nice little touch. And she's just surrounded by all these homeless people just sort of standing there staring at her. Most of them have that same sort of dried black stuff all over themselves. And there's this one guy who's not quite as dirty as the rest of them. Creepy. Looks like the guy from those commercials where the guy's like, I try to make sure that people don't turn into their parents for like the home and auto insurance. One of the companies, I forget which one. He reminded me a lot of that guy, but it's just like he didn't have as much of the goo all over himself as
he didn't have anything. He was clean,
and he was way more well spoken than any of the rest of them. Granted, most of them weren't talking at all, but then they bring out cameraman Jeff, and they just sort of put him on his knees as they then point the camera towards this one pipe, and then you get a glimpse of the Rat Man. And
a weird looking thing.
Yeah, what did you call him, Chris?
I said it looked like a cross between a xenomorph and a rat. I
said it looked like a flesh covered xenomorph.
Yeah, very kind of like the hybrid from Alien Resurrection.
Yeah.
And they have to like turn the light off on the camera because
it's sensitive to light.
And it just sort of crawls out like sort of screaming and carrying on, and then it just sort of spits this black goo out. The well-spoken guy just takes like a little dish, like scoops some of it up, goes over to Jeff and pours it on him, and it starts like smoking, and Jeff starts screaming and
burning him like acid.
Which Sam was like, it is a xenomorph. It's got acid blood.
and then they do the same thing, and then they do the same.
They said he wasn't.
He wasn't righteous.
Yeah.
And so then they decide they're going to do the same thing to her, and they pour it on her. And
no, it didn't pour it on her. They brought her all the way up to him, and he just kind of like barfed that shit on her.
Yeah, Ratma just sort of drooled it all over her as she's like screaming. And then we cut to news report in studios. The anchor.
Well, no, we had the commercial first.
Oh, that's right, the veggie masher.
It's a mock of the slap chop.
Yeah, very 90s slap chop sort of food processor kind of thing.
Oh,
which looks like it would have created more of a mess than anything.
Well, yes, that's sort of the joke with it. But then it cuts to like studio. The anchorman is just sort of like, we have footage now of our colleague. They mentioned her name. I can't remember what it was.
Holly.
And what? Holly. That's right. And it shows her. It shows like a news report crew with some police like helping her up out of a storm drain. She's got like she's got like black goo dried, streaked all over herself.
But not nearly as like
covered,
yeah.
And then and then the camera pulls back in studio. Anchorman has her like right next to her, and she's getting ready to, and she then does
he goes, "Oh, it's glad to have you back." And this and that. Before that, I still hadn't found the cameraman.
That's right. They still hadn't located the cameraman. And then she does like a little like piece about the upcoming
fall festival,
pumpkin festival.
That's what it was.
But as she's saying it, she keeps dropping the word Ratma into everything.
It's like, and we'll see who's the fairest of them all, fairest Ratma of them all, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And you can see that he's just sort of like looking at her like, what? And then she starts like sort of like coughing a little bit as some black goo drips from her mouth. She sort of like spits a little bit, and then he's like, all right, can we cut? And she then turns, barfs a whole bunch of it onto his face.
She like projectile vomited it onto his face.
Oh yeah, and he starts screaming and he starts like tearing his own face off.
It gave me some major Fly 2 vibes of when the Fly did something similar to one of the guards that was in the facility that he was in that film, where like even right after his face had been completely melted off, he was still breathing.
Yep. And she then just sort of like cleans off her chin and does like the little like
she does the weather report
and now let's take a look at the weather. And then she looks at the camera.
She said sports afterwards.
And sports afterwards. Then looks at the camera and just goes, "Hail Ratma."
She even says the sports. She did the weather like nothing had happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Smiles.
It was a little bit unsettling, but it was just like all of that
practical effects.
The practical effects was
the face peeling and the Ratma were both practical effects.
I appreciated that, and then the next segment was the empty wake. I mean, I'm going to just sort of gloss over the framework stuff in between.
The framework was just them getting different places.
Getting to different places in this warehouse complex or whatever.
Seeing more weird shit.
And them getting separated from the other members of the SWAT unit. And Slater, the big guy in the group, is just very much in favor of like calling in backup or getting the fuck out of there or whatever. But the empty wake, very minimalist in terms of like set and everything. A lot of them were in that respect. The one that I think had the most was definitely going to be the subject. But
yeah.
But the empty wake, it's in a funeral parlor, and they have the casket set up, and they're set up to have a wake for this like high schooler or something. Was he supposed to be?
I'm not sure what he was supposed to be.
But and the clients just wanted to have a wake, and it was going to be in the evening.
I think he was the guy who basically ran the funeral parlor. He was essentially like, I guess I could say...
One was the manager, one was the
coroner.
Coroner, yeah.
Or the embalmer.
Yeah, the guy that works with the bodies.
Yep. And yeah, well, those two, but the guy in the coffin was not like connected to the funeral parlor in any way. But regardless, they're having a wake that evening.
Someone wanted to have a wake late at night, and they paid extra
at 9 p.m.
And they were paying extra to do it.
No, paid extra to film it.
Yes, that's right. Because for a memorial video,
3 extra cameras.
3 cameras,
so
and she's just sort of like, aren't most memorial videos just going to be like home videos and stuff? And the manager's just like, they paid. Yeah, everybody grieves in different ways. This is what the client wanted, so this is what we're doing. And so we just basically see her after both the manager and the embalmer leave, and the embalmer makes some comment about how I put him back together as best I could, but there wasn't much left of his.
Yeah, you do get like subtle hints to what happened to the guy in the coffin. As the
embalmer makes a few like real black humor sort of comments on it, and keeps telling the girl, just like, go ahead and lift up the lid.
It's like, it'll make you feel better, because she thought that he moved. That was one subtle hint at the very beginning. He's like, well, what happened to the
because no, he's like, why is the coffin crooked? I didn't set it up that way.
And they're like, oh, I think I bumped into it on accident.
Yeah, but they leave, and we just sort of skip over the next several hours as she's just there by herself.
Changing tapes.
Reading books. Calling up her friend just to have somebody to talk to. And there's like a clock.
Well, she was also curious about the guy, because she hadn't heard about it and wanted to know if there was anything...
Well, especially after she thinks she hears a knocking sound from inside the casket.
That's one of the times she ended up calling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's a storm... coming through the air with a tornado watch in effect, and the there are a few points where the lights sort of flicker and you can see the lightning outside. And then at one point, the lights go out completely. So she grabs one of the cameras so that she has a flashlight, because it has a light attached to it, so she can see where she's going. She goes into like the storeroom to get a candelabra, brings it out into the main hall and sets it down to start lighting the candles, and then the power comes back on. So she's like, oh, great. So she blows out the candles and goes back to sitting around for a while. But she keeps hearing the knocking sound from inside the casket. And she calls up the embalmer, who's just sort of like, I've explained about this. You know what's going on. And she's like, it's gases escaping the body and causing like muscle contractions and stuff. I mean, you made some comment, Chris, about like a case where like a body sat up in a...
It was a person who we used to know. Her mom was telling me this one story about how she was at a funeral, and this is like after the funeral had literally just ended. Everybody's out in like the lobby or whatever, and next thing she heard was a scream coming from the room where the body was at. She runs in there to see what was wrong. The person who had screamed was laying on the floor like they had fainted. They look over in the coffin. The body had apparently sat up. Supposedly, like
the rigor mortis or something.
No, it had something to do with like I guess like gases in the body or something like that. Just like a little bit of gas, and just what caused the body to set up. It's kind of like that episode of Futurama where Bender became human, got fat, and was sitting.
Well, that was just like air trapped in the folds of his fat.
Yeah, well, I was thinking it was kind of like that, where it's just like as they were rolling, it was going woo.
Yeah. But she, sort of freaks out from all this. But then finally, at one point, this weird guy shows up.
Did we realize what time it was in the?
It was past midnight at that point.
Okay, I didn't know if it was like 1 or not.
Well, Jay was the one keeping an eye on the clock.
Because I figured everything was going to start kicking off around midnight. Because come on,
witching hour.
Yeah, exactly. And that is I think when the power started going out. But that's about it. Well, regardless, this guy shows up, sort of shabbily dressed, but not like tattered clothes or anything. Just a guy who's didn't like put on his nicest suit, sort of thing. And
looked like he got dressed in a rush.
Yeah, and has like a vaguely foreign accent, and he sort of apologizes. He's the only one that showed up. Makes some comment
that he was late.
It's like because of the storm and everything, and
like there's a tornado watch.
And he just has a seat, near the front, sort of looking at the casket, and just starts speaking in some foreign language.
Oh, she also asked him like, how did you know him?
And he just sort of gave a no response to it.
Yeah, he just straight brushed off her question.
Yep, and then once he's done reciting whatever it is he's reciting in magic words or whatever, he just calmly gets up and leaves. And she then finally gets
I don't think you noticed this or not, but he was holding his hand up.
Yeah.
Towards the coffin.
So you guys were all just sort of like he's casting a spell. But then there was the call she got from her friend that she had asked to look up like stuff in the obituary. And her friend calls back and it's just like, he wasn't in the obituaries. He was on like the front page. And he had been like on the roof of a building.
Like incanting.
Speaking in tongues or whatever.
And then like threw himself off the roof.
Yeah, and she's just... And then the power goes out again.
That she loses like all kinds of... like everything's just off.
Yeah, and she... I think at that point she like knocked on the coffin again and heard a knock back. Because she'd knocked on it before, hadn't heard anything, so she was like, I must have imagined it. But this time there was a definite knocking sound from within. And like the coffin like rocked and like the picture on top of it fell off, and that's when she was like, nope, I'm out. And she just, with the camera, so she has the light, heads for the door and finds that the doors leading out have been chained shut.
Those chains look way too new, like they had just been bought.
Mm-hmm. And just been put on, like by the weird foreign guy. And she then turns around, goes back into the parlor, and the coffin is fallen open and is empty.
And there's like dry blood.
Yeah, there's like fresh blood sort of like on the interior of it. And then as she's looking around, she sees the guy just sort of standing there facing the wall, and she like calls out to him. And then he turns around and like half of his head is gone. And it's just like, but it's not like just like the top half, it's like diagonal. It's like the eyes are missing. The entire top half of his head is gone.
It looks like the blind monster from damn it, I can't remember the name of that Korean series that's on Sweet Home. Yeah. Sweet Home. That's what it looks like.
And she freaks out and she like scurries back and is like trying to hide behind the chairs as she realizes
she turned off the light and then kept turning it back on to see if he would notice.
And she realized that the body is blind, and is being attracted to sound. So she's like moving around over towards the coffin because there's like a little remote to click on like the music and the speakers and everything. And there was also like a button that would cause the tape to eject from one of the cameras, I think, because the manager had warned her about that. And she, as she's like hiding over there, there's the top half of the head.
And it's staring at her.
No, its eyes were. She
kept checking back on it to make sure it wasn't doing anything.
And the eye was just shut, but the little remote was right next to it. So she reached over and grabbed it, clicked the button, and it ejected a tape from one of the cameras. And by this point, the tornado sirens are going off in the background also. It was a nice touch that the sirens sort of came on when the zombie was essentially moving around. And then as she the zombie goes rushing at the camera that had ejected the tape. And that's when she looks back at the head and she can see the eye is glancing around and then it looks straight at her. And when she next looks up, the zombie is rushing at her. Oh, and that's right. One of the point when she was like clicking the light on, off and on, one of the hands fell off.
Yeah, his right hand fell.
And she, then like
and she was scurrying
and
around
it was crawling around on the floor, and that made her scream, which is one reason why the thing kept chasing her. But then, as it's attacking her, we then see a shot from one of the other cameras as the windows burst in and the tornado basically.
Well, she fell over, and it's ambiguous of whether or not the zombie got to her.
Yeah, and then we just see the tornado hit the building.
Oh, it was just such a great effect too.
Mm-hmm. And then there's like a bunch of like static and jumbled stuff, and then when we finally get a steady image, the camera's like upside down. The place is wrecked. There's a chair embedded in the wall, and then we see her just sort of staggering unsteadily, but it's not clear if she's been bitten or turned or what. Because the staggering around could just as easily have been shock.
Yeah,
or the debris
blast.
Yeah, it's her stumbling around because of the debris.
That too, and just sort of staggers off.
Well, what I found weird was she kind of like touched her torso all the way up her body, like she didn't know who she was, because it wasn't the same kind as if somebody was patting themselves down to
check for injuries or
checking for injuries. It was like,
oh, that's what this feels like.
This is me.
So that means
is this what I am now?
So do you think it was a soul transfer?
Maybe.
Because it acted like it wasn't her in her own body.
Nope.
And that's something that's good about some like shorter stories like this is that they're not going to give you full context on everything, and sometimes not having the context is what makes it kind of freaky. But then the third one was the subject, the longest entry in the whole thing. And it was by some Indonesian director, you said.
Yeah.
So
we were trying to figure out what the language was,
because it didn't sound like anything we've heard before.
So
yeah.
I had to look up who the director was, and then when I saw that he was Indonesian,
and then it was some point after that they mentioned Jakarta, that this was that they were finding like the body parts in this like storm drains and stuff, and that's when it was as soon as they mentioned Jakarta, I was like, okay, yeah, that's Indonesia. But the subject focuses on this mad scientist who they explain was like expert prostheticist. Like he made like mechanical prosthetics for people. He was like brilliant surgeon or engineer in that respect. But we don't find that out until like halfway through the entry, as it's just him like speaking to the camera like in a very sort of clinical fashion about the various subjects that he's been working on. And the first one we see, it just sort of opens on a head, on like a person's face with like a strap across the head, and then you can see that he has some sort of like collar on, and I'm like, what is this, Asian Saw or something? And
it pans out, no, it's Asian Sid.
Yeah, Sid from Toy Story, we should say.
That's what I said, because of the way that it looked like that one thing that he had made where it was like the doll head and had the mechanical legs on it.
Yeah, the spider legs, yeah. Because it was literally just this guy's head with on like a base that had like these mechanical like spider legs on them. And the guy just sort of wakes up from it, starts screaming, falls out of like the thing that was holding him in place, and you see it catch fire. And the doctor just sort of comes in and sprays it down with a fire extinguisher. And we cut to another time, and he has two subjects, a guy and a girl. He specifies them as like male subject 98, female subject 99, and we see him take the top of her head off. There's like a thing set up, but you see him take like the bone saw thing and cutting at the top of her head, and you see him lift off like the cap of her skull and then lift out her brain. And by this point, the guy has woken up, and he's got like some sort of thing, like a tube stuffed down his throat, and he's like strapped down and everything, but he's just sort of like shaking around on his table. And the doctor just sees, like, did I not dose you enough? You see him take up a syringe, go over and jab it in the guy's eye. And then from that point forward, we get one of two different perspectives. We either get a first-person perspective, because the doctor has, at the time, we thought just like implanted a camera in her eye or something. We don't find out till later that it was like, nope, it was way more than that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like first-person perspective from all this. Is she's like tied down to a bed, and she's like looking. She like looks around. She's like tries pulling her left arm, and then looks over at her right, and her hand is gone. It's just a stump. And we get a few glimpses of him working on what's clearly the guy over on another table, as he's strapped a giant freaking cleaver to one of his arms.
It looks like Cloud's sword the way it's shaped.
Yeah. It did look like a Buster sword from like Final Fantasy VII.
Oh, probably not nearly as heavy.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Maybe.
No, I think one of those like maker YouTube channels that has like blacksmiths and stuff actually did try to make the Buster sword, and said that it was like way too heavy for anybody to conceivably lift.
Jesus.
But at any rate, and at this point, she like they cut in and out a few times as he like is like making adjustments to whatever he's done to her head.
He added a piece to her arm too, where it was like
there was like a metal cuff of some sort by the stump.
It was like you can interchange it with whatever you wanted.
Mm-hmm. And then that's when we see her like glance over at a TV where there's like a news report sort of explaining that the people in Jakarta are looking for this doctor, Dr. Suhendra, I believe they gave his name as. That's where they explain, that he was a prostheticist.
A lot of his patients were going missing.
A lot of his patients have been going missing, and they've been finding body parts like in gutters and storm drain channels and everything. And she, and he makes some comment about how nobody quite understands what he's trying to do. But with her, he managed to prove that it's possible to blend flesh with metal, kind of thing. He calls her like a neo-human. And then the SWAT team shows up. And at this point, I'm like, okay.
Well, he also acknowledged that she recognized who she was.
Yeah. Because she saw, like, her picture on the TV. It's like the latest person to go missing kind of thing. In connection with him. And then the SWAT team shows up. And I'm just like, hey, I bet these guys were all, like, in the Raid movies. Because the Raid movies were Indonesian.
Oh.
So, hey, we need you guys for this part in this movie.
Sure, and they're like, yeah, sure. Heck, Dr. Suhendra, I swear, was like the crime boss they were trying to arrest in the original Raid movie.
I still need to watch those.
The first one is very good. The second one, less of a raid. It's continuing the story.
More action.
No, I mean both of them were very action driven.
No,
but
I mean
anyway,
like outside of
outside of one building. It was more like going after an entire organization rather than one guy. And the SWAT team, they have a cameraman there as well. I think for the same reasons as the SWAT team in the framing story, for documentation purposes, to show that they got the guy, sort of thing. And they basically asked the guy to identify himself. Are you Dr. James Suhendra or whatever? And when they get the confirmation that they need, they just open up on him.
Oh no, he said, oh, what do you think is going to happen now? He's like, oh, well, you're just going to take me, arrest me, put me somewhere. And he's like, no. Walks back, tells them, light him up, and just, pretty much. And told him to cut it out when it was too much.
Yeah.
And well, and like, we're here to. He's like, our mission was here to rescue people.
He didn't. They all stopped shooting when he dropped, but it was the cameraman that they had who was just sort of like made some sort of comment about him, and it's just sort of like don't forgive him for what he did. We're here to kill this guy and rescue.
Well, they said rescue victims. That was just extra.
Yeah. And so then they, as they're basically fanning out looking for victims, one of them pulls the blanket off of Subject 99's head because the doctor had thrown one over her, and the cameraman sees her, and one of the other SWAT guys comes over, sees her, and then eventually the commander as well, and all of them sort of recoil a bit in shock. And they're very careful not to show what's going on with her whenever it cuts to the SWAT cameraman's perspective.
We saw her like crab walking away.
Well, and even the crab walking was literally just somebody like scrambling backwards.
Yeah, but we only got like a very, very small
glimpse of
metal in like more or less in place of the head, but we couldn't see exactly what was going on. But before that happened, they think that she's just dead because she hasn't been moving, because she had like broken out of her restraints and started and like punched him in the face with the metal cuff. And when she tried to tried to untie her feet, he got back up and started beating her with like a bedpan or something.
And that's when the SWAT broke in.
Yeah, and so but she was just sort of like stunned and just sort of sitting there, and it wasn't until like the SWAT captain makes some raises his gun like to put her out of her misery kind of thing, or there was something like she finally moved and they realized that she was still alive, and so then people are aiming guns. She's just sort of like raising her hand like, no, please don't shoot me. Please. The
cameraman's the one that noticed that she was the girl.
They had recognized that she was the missing girl, and the SWAT captain is just sort of like, she doesn't have a soul anymore. And it's just like, I'm not taking that back to her parents.
Which, I mean, you could see that, like, holy shit, like, how could you do that? But taking what is left of her life isn't really... And that's what the cameraman tried to say.
Yeah, Jono, the cameraman. Jono's just sort of like, that's not your decision to make. And...
So I kind of see both sides, like, you don't want to take it to the parents, but I also know don't still kind of alive. Unless it's asked for a mercy killing.
And then I forget what happened that distracted them from her. I think it was just like the door back out of that room had like shut, and they were having problems getting it open.
No, it's when she. I don't know. I think he tried to pull the gun away from him or something, or he went to shoot and something else happened, and she scuttled away.
Yeah, and then they're just sort of like
block the door.
Yeah, block the door.
And one of them tried to open the door and it wasn't working, so he started shooting the
lock.
The latch.
Yeah, and then as they start hauling it open, you hear just like a little sound, and
it's like, shit, someone's got a Mega Buster.
And there was basically a proximity bomb or something attached to the door, and then the door like shuts again as the explosion like takes out some of the SWAT guys, and
like 3 of them, they're closest ones to it.
The captain and Jonah were both all right, and there were like 1 or 2 others that were elsewhere in the room.
So it's probably only 2 of them, because I think 6.
Because they had like spread out to try to find other exits to make sure that she couldn't get away. And then there's like a recording that comes on of the doctor basically being like, this is my creation, you can't take it away from me.
Like, if you're hearing this, I'm already dead, and I want to make sure you all die too.
And like alarms start going off, and then a couple of the SWAT guys go to investigate the body of the dude, and then one of them gets too close as the arm just comes up and just sinks that giant cleaver through his chest, and when he sits up and the sheet comes off of him, like it's just got like weird ass thing. It was like one of the boss type enemies in Resident Evil Village from the factory level.
The way the eyes were done reminded me of Short Circuit.
Yeah. Or
but the skull,
or Mr. Handy from Fallout.
I was also thinking of, like, because of the way the skull looked, it reminded me of all like the failed RoboCop clones from RoboCop 2.
Yeah,
the one that like walked out,
pulled the helmet off,
just all skull, and it screams and kills itself.
Yeah, and it turns out it's got a blade on the other arm too, and it just starts going to town on the SWAT guys as Jono's like freaking out, and the captain finally like chucks a grenade at it, and then I think it cuts back over to her at this point, as she's just trying to get away from all of this, because by this point the SWAT guys are just like, fuck this, kill everything,
pretty much.
And she's just sort of trying to make her way out of there, and the Subject Alpha, I think is what the credits called the blade arm guy. He's just sort of chasing after her. She ends up falling, darting sideways through a corridor to get away from some SWAT guys and all of this, and ends up falling into what was probably the doctor's bedroom. And she's just looking around, and there's like schematics there for other like components that he was presumably planning to graft onto people. And one of them is a grenade launcher.
Looks like a big clipped machine gun, like with a barrel on it.
Mm-hmm. And
a grenade launcher.
And she's seeing like pictures of a woman that might have been her. I couldn't quite tell.
Could have been other subjects.
Could have been other subjects. And there's something there that was clearly like in a jar or something that was covered with a sheet. And as she's reaching for it, I'm like, there's going to be a head in there. She pulls it off, and half of a head, but I was right. But
I think that was definitely top half of her head once you see what happens.
That's right, because she pulls it off, sees the top half of a woman's head in there, and her reaction to it, like sort of recoiling back, and then looking over at a mirror, like in front of a sink on the wall. She then walks up to the mirror, and we finally get a chance to see that what he did to her, and it's basically like she's just got this big ass like camera framework thing in place of the top half of her head. Like her mouth and jaw were still there, and she starts screaming, and it's distorted from.
I kept picturing her as looking more like the camera head Cenobite from Hellraiser 3, though. If you don't know what that looks like, just look it up, because I don't really want to go like too spoilery on how that character looked.
And she starts like punching the mirror, and I figured that would have almost been a good place to end the the segment, but it kept going as she wanders into more hallways and finds there was way more to this complex than what we saw, and there were way more subjects there than just the 3 that we witnessed.
Oh yeah, there was a shit ton.
A lot of body horror as she's just looking around and seeing all these people with machine parts like grafted onto them. Some of them hanging from ceilings. She like hears somebody calling out, "Hello? Hello?" Goes into a room and you can just see a head connected to some machinery and stuff.
Audio equipment. Yeah,
audio equipment, and it when she like walks up close enough so you can just make out that it's a head. It then its mouth moves and it just goes, calls out to her, and she like freaks out and runs out, and she finds more of these poor people, including this one woman.
Oh my God.
on the table, like her entire like torso had been opened up, and there were just machine parts and everything all in it, blood all over the place, and she had like a metal like collar with wires and stuff in it, and she's just like looks at her and just is like, help me. And she unplugs her, and you see her like just sort of seize up and dies.
She was like more machine than person.
Yeah, and 99 just sort of closed her eyes at that point. And then a SWAT guy shows up and starts trying to shoot at her. And she, scrambles for cover, knocks over a equipment table, and there were a bunch, and that's where we saw the grenade launcher or the gun mod sort of thing that she grabs, plugs into her stump with the cuff, and then we get it's like the level that scene from the Doom movie or from Hardcore Henry, as she just starts opening up on SWAT guys with the machine gun and built into this thing, and it was an interesting take on it, but we got to see some gore. Even more gore, like when she snapped that pipe off the wall and shoved it through the guy's head.
Jesus, yeah.
She not only did that, but she also like
yanked
dragged,
it forward.
she dragged it with him connected to a corner
into a wall,
a wall, and then she used the machine gun and like essentially, I want to say pistol whip, but she pretty much bashed him in the head with
thumped
it.
Him with
his head went backwards, but the pipe took his jaw with it.
Yeah. Just sort of dislocated.
I gotta say, a lot of this had a lot of good physical and practical.
There was there was some CG, I think, in the subject for some of that, but like but yeah, it was. They went for practical over CG as much as possible, and I always do appreciate that. But eventually, she gets injured, or she runs, and then she like catches one of them, and she like shoves him against the wall. And she has like the gun to his face, and that's when I realized that's the cameraman, as he's just sort of like pleading with her not to kill him, and he's like, what do you want? And she just says, to live.
He's like, yeah, so do I.
Let's get out of here. And then as they're
exit over there,
and as they're getting to like a set of stairs leading towards an exit, SWAT captain shows up and starts shooting.
He knocked her down the stairs and started shooting at her.
Yeah, and when the gun gets empty, he just comes up and just starts like tearing components out of her head, and is like bashing her with the butt of his gun. And then Jono, the cameraman, just kills the SWAT captain with his sidearm. And then as he goes to try to help her back up, Subject Alpha comes charging in and just starts ripping him apart, and
tore off both of his arms.
And had been stabbing him. And she gets up, goes over to Subject Alpha, and just tears the top of his head.
Keeps tearing at the top of his head,
and then rips the brain out of his skull. And Alpha just finally collapses, and she, by this point, is like injured herself and just sort of collapses on the floor, looking at Jono, who's just sort of like gives her a nod of like, thank you for saving him from killing me, but he dies, and the battery.
All past dead.
Yeah, the battery in her camera died, and then we finally get like a surveillance camera showing the three of them, all lying there on the ground, and there's like a little like flicker cut in the camera, and then we see her like staggering, like clearly just still like in shock and stumbling around because, well, her body's been fucked up, and just staggering out of the building. But then, in the final bit of framework before the last segment, this is where there is something important with this, because Slater, the big SWAT guy, is still like, we need to get the fuck out of here, and the two lady SWATs with him were like telling him to shut up or something.
We got to continue the mission.
Yeah, we got to continue the mission, and they're passing like a bank of TVs. And there was a sound coming from one of them that made him stop, turn around, and look at it. And he then sort of collapses to his knees like, I never thought I'd hear that again. And then it cuts into the next segment, which was called Terror. And the noise coming from it was like a siren bell.
That's a weird bell.
Very weird, distinctive sounding thing. And we're in this, well, we'll just go ahead and call it what it is, a militia compound somewhere in, I'm going to guess Montana.
They said Detroit.
Detroit, that's right. It was somewhere in Michigan. As, the sirens going off, and we see a bunch of these militia guys, including one that has a cameraman, because they believe that they're in the right with all this, so they're documenting it so that they can show the world, see, we were right, sort of thing.
Further push along the agenda.
Yep, and they go into this cage that they have in this barn, and there's a man in there
pleading for his life,
and they just shoot him in the head, and he just sort of
they just kind of leave after that, and then
the sirens switched off by this point, and they're basically just a bunch of fascist, ultra right wing, racist fucks.
They never said anything about race throughout the entire thing.
It was heavily implied, because they're using they refer to the leader as Herr Commandant, and the wording that they put on the box that was also said Guten Morgen, good morning. It's it feels very much like they were meant to be racist. They may not have said anything specifically racist, but like I said, very heavily implied.
They were staking out a place that they were going to
a government building in Detroit.
They were going to blow up,
but they drove up there in a van. They sent one of them out with like a camcorder and a walkie-talkie as he's like, I'm seeing a bunch of surveillance cameras. There's guards there. But they're, trying to determine like the right point of entry, sort of thing. And they were making comments about how there's not enough sunlight there.
Like, that's the entrance, but we need sunlight.
And it's like we have like a weather window that we need to hit, kind of thing, because they need sunlight.
We were like, what the fuck does that mean? Well, whatever.
And they make some comment about how they're going to set loose the beast or the abomination or whatever, and I'm just thinking, okay, they're going to set off a bomb, but there's something in the building that's gonna fuck it up for them. But when they come back to the compound, a cop shows up with a...
Oh no, the alarm was going off again.
Yeah,
and they shot the same guy in the head.
Yeah, and at first I was like, wait, is that the same guy? And
are they just showing us the same clip again? What the hell's going on?
But no, there were different people in the room at that time. Yeah, it's like the commandant was still in there, but there were other people involved. And then then we get the police officer shows up with a pickup truck loaded with like a 50 cal machine gun and a bunch of AR-15s, and it wasn't until after this segment was over and we cut back to the framework that I realized that was Slater. And in between all this, the commandant, makes some, speeches about how, there's a black cancer in the heart of this country, and we've got to burn it out, or, typical sort of militia, weird right, pseudo right wing.
Always claiming they were getting the word from Jesus.
Yeah, Christ the King, and all that. And
while he's up there shaking his hands like, don't bring me into your shit.
Well, at that point they did bring the cop on camera, and the commandant sort of shook him by the hand. And well, even before that part, as they were unloading the stuff from the back of the truck, Slater made some comments about how there are a lot of cops out there that don't like what's going on in the White House and all that. They're just waiting for patriots like you to start the movement or whatever. Typical sort of BS. All cops are bad, etc., etc., etc. But then we finally get another glimpse of them shooting the same guy in the head again. But this time, we see what they usually do afterwards, where they sort of carefully prop up the body and tilt the head so that the blood drains out of it into a funnel that they take into a bucket. And it's like they made some comment about how, have you tested your weapon?
Oh yeah, they put him on the spot when they're doing his little speech. He's like, yeah, of course.
And then we see them actually testing it as they take like a bunny rabbit,
inject it with something.
Well, no, but when they were draining the blood from the guy's head, they made sure to say, make sure you don't get any of that on you. And at that point, I'm like, is this supposed to be the goo or whatever from Ratma or something? But then we see them take, with like a needle or something, or maybe like a bit of like a food dye, like injector kind of thing. But they take this bunny rabbit, they put a little bit of inject it with the blood, or pour a little bit of blood onto it, stick it in a cage, put it out into a
white rabbit. I didn't see any red on it, so I'm guessing they
injected it. Okay, but they put it in a little like rabbit hutch cage thing, took it into a field, and then as they're like getting it set up and everything, they're like,
get the fuck back! The sun's coming up.
The sun's coming up. Get down, everybody! And so they all get down. There's nothing happens, and then finally it's just sort of like the clouds must have been in the wet. Boom! And then suddenly the rabbit explodes.
That's like a gigantic explosion.
And then they're all just celebrating. It's just like,
it works. It actually works.
And then we saw them doing a test run of their device, which was literally just like a big wooden crate, had their like militia's logo on it with Guten Morgen, and he had like a little remote switch that he was going to click, and in theory what it was supposed to do was all four sides were supposed to open at once, but instead they fell, like just two sides fell apart, and the guy that built it is just sort of like, I need a component, and the commandant's like, well, now you're going to have to go and get it tomorrow, which means we're go to do this the day after, so let's get drunk.
He says it in a way they couldn't understand.
And it's like, corks high and bottle deep. I mean, it means let's get drunk and party.
Well, it means let's get shit-faced. Come on, let's go.
Oh, that moonshine.
Oh, yeah, because they were drinking it out of mason jars and shit. Although I think there were some actual booze and liquor to hand, but there was some moonshine being passed around.
Well, what's the best thing to do before you're trying to do a mission that has highly volatile, explosive material?
No, this was like 2 days before they were going to do it, so it's not like, in theory, it's not like they were going to be hungover on the day.
Yeah. Still, you're around that kind of material.
Mm-hmm. And we see a bunch of them, sort of drunkenly pulling pranks on one another, like the sound recorder guy, record equipment is getting like poked into a guy's ass. They're like sword fighting with it
outside.
Yeah, and then one of them goes into the barn where they have the guy,
the surveillance guy,
mm-hmm. and
watching them.
And the surveillance guy's name is Steve. And we recognize who Steve was because he was the guy that had the big black eye.
They never explained that.
I took that to just mean that he probably got punched in the face by one of the other guys over something stupid.
Wasn't he one of the guys who was in like the vicinity, kind of got knocked back by the exploding rabbit?
Yeah, but he had the black eye before that.
Okay.
He had the black eye from like the beginning of the segment.
I wasn't paying attention to his
that was
eye.
just something he actually had.
Yeah, I personally just think that's a good way to help identify him. You know, because you're not necessarily getting good glimpses at a lot of these guys, and a lot of them are just sort of
all VHS quality.
It's all VHS quality, and they're all like fat white guys with beards. There's like one guy that had a handlebar mustache, but that's about it.
So he's trying to get the surveillance guys. Oh, come on, man, get drunk with us.
And he's just sort of like, fuck off, I'm on duty, kind of thing.
It's like, I'm trying to work
and
here,
then
damn it.
somehow, next scene, he's already in the cage with.
Well,
them.
because they keep calling him a pussy, and they want him to go in and like piss on the guy.
And he said, "What the fuck's wrong with you?"
Yeah, but they like peer pressure him into going into the cage, and the guy is still dead. Like the body's sort of sat there slumped, but the guy hasn't come back to life or whatever. And he props the guy up.
He's like, "You dare me to kiss him?
You dare me to kiss him? Yeah,
Yeah,
French him." And then like he slips, or no, like the body like slumps, and the
brain
head
matter gets into his mouth.
And then as he like shoves the body away, he then slips and just falls onto the ground, and it's just like there. And you see there's a bunch of like blood all over the floor. And then we cut to the next morning as the alarm is going off again. Everybody comes.
Who's on duty?
You know, and so they go over to the barn. They find a body on the ground, dead, and they're like, "That's Terry." You know, who was supposed to be on duty, and the guy with the handlebar mustache or whatever is just like, that was me. I was supposed to do it. I think it's Steve. Steve was on duty last night, and then they hear something growling inside the barn, and one of the guys by this point has gotten in the back of their technical when he's on the 50 cal, and the commandant's like, "Don't shoot that thing until I tell you.
Don't shoot at all."
Yeah. And then there's like a growl, and a head gets chucked out of the building. The guy on the 50 cal freaks out, starts shooting, but of course none of them have actually used this thing because they literally just got it the day before, and so he's not used to the recoil. It's just like,
and he's all over the place. Shoots up two of his buddies.
Yeah.
Explains the reason why one of them said, "I got a boner now."
No, I think he said I got a boner because it was when they were transporting the 50 cal.
True.
But it's like the guy won't stop shooting, so the commandant has to shoot him.
It's because if you've got all that reverberation, you either let go and you
or you lock up, yeah. And
so he just popped like 5 shots in the back of his head.
And then they're still like calling into the building, and then Steve starts stumbling out, and
Steve, you're covered in this shit. Don't come out.
They say, "Steve, you're covered in vampire blood. Don't come any close." Boom.
And that's when we get the realization of, holy fuck, that guy they kept killing over and over again is a vampire. Explains why
he keeps coming back to life.
And they have a timed alarm for...
No, it's not a timed alarm. I took it to mean that they have somebody on surveillance when they see the guy's alive again, hit the button to set off the alarm.
I thought it would be like a timed one because they know how long it takes for it to regenerate.
I don't know. That wouldn't explain why you'd have somebody on surveillance duty for it.
Make sure he doesn't get the fuck out.
Maybe. But, so then they go in, they all like arm up and they go into the building trying to find the vampire.
The kind of vampire when you actually get to see him, he like bites somebody's face off. And it looks similar to how they looked in
Blade 2.
Blade 2, yeah.
But Blade 2 had more of kind of like almost a predator mouth. This one was like all the way down the neck almost.
Yeah. And we did get a brief glimpse of the vampire before he like fully vamped out. As just like the cameraman is like looking around inside there, and he looks down this one thing, and you can just see like a humanoid shape and 2 like glints for the eyes. Before the commandant says something, the camera whips back to look at him, and when it turns back to look down that hallway again, he's gone. But they can hear the vampire like moving around upstairs. And one of them finally goes up into the loft, and vampire suddenly shows up. That's when we get to see like the unhinged jaw and everything as it bites the dude's face off. And they're like shooting up there. It's like, I think I got it.
Yeah, I think I did.
And so cameraman and commandant go up there, and they're looking around trying to find it, and it like attacks like pops up behind the commandant, and the cameraman takes out his like sidearm, starts shooting, ends up clipping the commandant's leg before the vampire slips away, then like flanks the cameraman, knocks him out, and like chews off part of his face. And then the vampire just goes over and drags the commandant into the cage. The commandant just
we now see that the cage had. We were seeing all the crosses. We're like, what the hell? And I noticed the white things, and I'm like, put two and two together once we found out vampire. It's all garlic all over it.
Yeah, not that it did anything. Neither of them did anything. But it stands to reason why they would put garlic and crosses all over the place, because they know it's a vampire.
Well, it's kind of like, what was it in the first Blade film where he's like, yeah, garlic and crosses don't do shit.
Yeah. But, and the commandant's just sort of kneeling there in the cage, just sort of, praying, Christ the King, as the vampire just goes over to a little control console, slaps a button which makes like the door, like
the roof open.
The roof open up. Sunlight comes in, boom, and we just see an explosion. Everything whites out, and then we cut back to the framework, where turns out the two females on the SWAT team were in on whatever was going on inside the warehouse. And it's literally just like super underground, like
horror snuff,
kind of things, VHS only, and they're taking off their like SWAT uniforms, and they've got like some white clothing on underneath, and that's literally what they're there for, chicks in white suits fucking shit up.
She also mentions we're the final girls.
Yeah, we're your final girls.
Which is a nice touch back to other movies. The final girl, there's always one. It's them when they take off whatever clothing they usually have, and it's like a white tank top or a white shirt at the end. That's the final girl. And it's a trope as hard as hell.
That's true.
Slashers.
That's true. And Slater by this point is like just tied to a chair, and one of them just takes cameraman Gary's camera, because Gary got killed prior to the terror segment, and she just literally smashes his face in using the camera as it's getting all cracked and everything.
That's some really good effects.
Mm-hmm. And then they then use the cracked camera thing to just film what's left of Slater's head. And it's like, there's the money shot. What are we going to call this? And then just roll credits. VHS 94. It was, yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm not really one for horror. The Empty Wake is the one that's probably going to keep, and the Storm Drain are probably both going to be in the back of my head for a while. The Empty Wake especially, because just the ones where it's like nothing is scary, where there's like very, very little going on, but just it ratchets up the tension, is the kind of stuff that just makes me be like, no, it's gonna happen, and then I'm gonna be scared, and it's gonna just be in the back of my head forever.
Well, that's why we watched it midday instead of at night.
Midday in a dark basement.
Dimly lit.
When you pulled the blinds on the basement door to make sure there wasn't any sunlight coming in. Thanks.
No problem. Well, it was going to be shining in my eyes. I didn't want that shit.
I mean,
that's why we usually have
when
the
it
TV
comes to like the creepy horror stuff is the stuff that I like and simultaneously hate because of how it's going to sit in the back of my head. It's why I liked some of the Slender Man stuff. Like Marble Hornets and Everyman Hybrid. Although Everyman Hybrid got a little bit harder for me to follow because they kept doing a whole bunch of like crossover stuff with other Slender Man and related YouTube channels. But Marble Hornets, because so much of it was just like nothing is going on, but you start picking up on the little telltale signs that something is happening.
So, bringing it back to this, how did you feel overall being one of your first horror casts?
I liked it. I did like it. It was very well done. Like you said, the special effects and everything and
being practical. Most of it was practical, and if some of it was CG, it did. You could tell which ones were full on CG. Of course, like the spider, the mechanical body with the head, but most of the practical effects look really, really good.
And because and because they were also deliberately putting the quality back a couple of decades to fit in the 90s framework, that helped hide some of the places where the practical effects might fail.
I actually really enjoyed this. Kind of makes me want to... You said the first two were the best? The first two were really good also? I kind of want to go back and watch the first two also.
Did you want to try to do like a binge for that for just us, unless
I'm probably not going to join in on that. But,
we can do that.
Yeah. But yeah, this was a good little anthology.
Favorite of them all. Because like you could say the framework, but the framework's just
frameworks. Yeah,
but it did work in.
It worked with how
and
it
it
was
did
all
mention
tying
stuff
everything
like
together.
at the beginning. It mentioned the goop.
Yeah,
people were being found with that goop, so that was Ratma. I saw the coffin in between some of the segments.
There might have been some glimpses of some of the stuff from
mechanical stuff, probably bodies.
But yeah, I think that was supposed to be in the segment immediately preceding it,
probably.
Yeah. And then Terror, obviously, the biggest tie-in there was Slater.
Yep. So, which one did you like? Which one would you say would be your favorite, or put them in order of most to least?
I would probably go Empty Wake, Subject, Storm Drain, but those two are real close. It's hard for me to pick between the two, but the Empty Wake is just a study in minimalism with all of that, and then Terror rounding it out, because I'm leaving the framework out of it.
Okay, I would say if we do anything, it would be Terror would be wrapped in with the framework.
Well, except it does sort of stand alone by itself. Yeah. But it does tie into the framework. But I'm keeping Terror by itself.
I have to say probably my favorite one is probably the funeral one.
Yeah,
the wake.
The wake. Just because of like the way it was just done, where it just like you could see hers, just like past the time. You just kept sitting there going, "Okay, when's shit gonna happen?"
It was slow. It was a slow burn.
Mm-hmm. And there was a moment. Looking back on it now, it may just have been the way the light was sort of falling on like a decoration on the wall by the door frame leading into the room. But it looked like there was somebody standing there when the lights went out.
And when they didn't film anything, and you're putting stuff in your own head, they did a good job.
Yeah. But that's just how
that was your favorite. Did you want to put them in any particular order?
Not really. Like that one, I'd have to say is my top favorite. It's really hard for me to place the last one because I don't know why. For some reason, I felt like that one was kind of like the weakest one of them.
Oh, Terror.
Yeah, but that's just my opinion. Just because it just felt a little too out of place because...
Well, all of them have their own different kind of set and genre. Because the first one was pretty serious, but then got comedic. The second one was very, very good. I thought it was probably the best one out of all of them, The Wake.
Mm-hmm. But I really like the third one.
Yeah,
the subject.
The subject was very well done. I had like Soma vibes from that with the body horror.
So I'd have to say my two favorite ones is The Subject and The Wake.
Yeah. Okay. For me, it would be Wake would be number one for sure. I did like The Subject and Ratma for their own reasons, and I liked their take in Terror on vampire. Yeah. The reason why they can't go out in sunlight, they can't because boom explosions. Like a lot of stuff. Other movies show them just like they fall to ashes, they turn to stone, some other crap, or just vanish into ash.
Or they just catch on fire, maybe not burn to ash, but they just start burning alive.
Or some sparkle.
Those aren't vampires. I'm sorry.
Those are glitter trolls.
Don't demean trolls by lumping them in with that. Yes, the glitter fairies in the Twilight novels are not vampires. Don't at me. Or no, you know what? Go ahead, at me. I don't give a fuck. They are not vampires. You can fuck off with that.
Overall, I really enjoyed it. It definitely, people were saying it is a bring back to VHS 1 and 2. Unfortunately, nobody else but me can really say that amongst the three of us. Mm-hmm.
But it was a good little intro to Horror Fest. What else are we planning for this year?
Crap.
Because you had like some Trick or Treat.
Trick or Treat is another anthology. Different people. The director or the framework.
Because that's
artist,
like one of your favorite like horror movies.
It's so good.
Because I got
I've seen it.
I got you the little like figure for it or whatever for.
You got me a Sam?
Yeah, didn't I? I swear I did. Or maybe I went in on buying it with somebody else. Regardless, but yeah, I think
Zeke bought me the Sam Funko.
I think I might have gone in on halvesies or something on that, but yeah. So yeah, Trick or Treat.
I also have like a 3 to 4 foot tall Sam that holds a
like a candy bowl.
dish.
Yeah. So yeah, we got Trick or Treat to come, and then Peninsula. That's right. I'm assuming I won't have to have.
We were supposed to do that last year.
Yeah, you were supposed to, but I think it was just like
everything got in the way. Yeah,
there was like people's work schedules got in the way and everything. But yeah, we got a bunch of. There's a whole bunch of stuff. You and Chris and maybe Zeke will probably make use of Shudder while you have your.
I asked Zeke what he would want to watch. I said, "Hey, you want to do something with Shudder? Check it out, see what you would want to put on it." He's like, "I'm not really a horror fan." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "I'm more of a suspense kind of thing." I was like, "Oh, wow."
Well,
damn.
At any rate, we do have more stuff planned for Horrorcast this year, which I will be joining in with. And then, of course, next month we'll be covering the John Carpenter Apocalypse trilogy.
If we don't do a binge of this, I really want to sit down and watch that with you.
What, Behind the Mask?
Yes.
Okay.
Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Love this movie.
It's a mockumentary kind of thing.
It is ridiculously good.
Okay.
And I cannot boast this enough. And if you're a fan of any kind of slasher, you'll get a kick out of it because it makes mention that the slashers that we watch on the movies are real in this world. They have existed. Those aren't movies. Those are documentaries.
Okay, that's an interesting take on it. I like it.
And then, if you're a fan of slashers, I've been a big fan of not being able to use words and function in English.
We all have those moments.
I'm a fan of Friday the 13th. I always have been. I love like slasher movies, and if you're a big slasher fan like I am, I highly recommend at least the first couple Hatchet movies and Behind the Mask: Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Okay.
Really, really good.
This is just sort of reminding me I need to find some.
Also a zombie fan, by the way.
There's an indie wrestler who has like a slasher sort of gimmick. Calls himself the Carver of Cutter's Alley. But at any rate, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Horrorcast. So for Chris and Sam, I am Jay, and we will see you next week.
Keep spooky.
You've been listening to a Bored to Death Horrorcast. Our back library of episodes can be found on YouTube or CKCC Radio. We will find you when it's time to binge and purge.